Hello, welcome back to the Life from Nurse podcast. I'm sure that you are either sick of Watches and Wonders coverage, or you are still kind of hearing about some of the new releases from Watches and Wonders this year. I'm going to give you sort of my favorite Watches and Wonders releases from the 2023 show. If you want to see some of the predictions that we made, you can head over to the Life from the Nurse YouTube channel, where we actually went through some of the most common predictions for the releases of this year. Some of them were pretty spot on. A couple of them were related to Rolex. Namely, if you think about it, they had a ton. There was a big celebration and anniversary of the Rolex Daytona, and obviously Rolex released sort of a redesigned Daytona. Redesigned maybe in scare quotes, because the redesign is very, very close to what it was previously, but I did cover some of the most common predictions for this year. One of the ones that I was a little bit disappointed of that didn't end up seeing was the Vacheron Constantin reference 222 re-edition. They did not decide to come out with that in steel or a two-tone steel and gold version of that. If you don't know, about a year ago they released a fully gold re-edition of the famous reference 222, but Vacheron Constantin decided to not release the steel one. Maybe they're waiting another year or so before they end up doing that. We'll have to see what happens. But they did have some pretty cool releases, and I'll discuss one of them that I thought was really interesting. By far, one of my favorite releases for this year is from A. Lange & Söhne. The brand decided to release the A. Lange & Söhne Odysseus chronograph. This is a self-winding steel chronograph that really speaks to just about everything that A. Lange & Söhne would release. The brand is known for exceptionally high quality pieces, and for me, I think this watch really stood head and shoulders above many of the other releases at Watches and Wonders, or at least for the names that many people are going to end up knowing. So if you don't know, the Odysseus is the A. Lange & Söhne watch that sort of tries to compete against the steel sports watches of many other brands. Obviously, it looks very, very much like A. Lange & Söhne, with a lot of the design aesthetics on the dials and the high quality finishing on the movement. But up until this point, we haven't had an Odysseus chronograph, but they have released a chronograph now, which is a big feat in the sort of stainless steel A. Lange & Söhne lineup of watches. And it really shows the incredible abilities of A. Lange & Söhne. So this watch is a 42.5 millimeter, 14 millimeter thick stainless steel watch with a 60 minute chronograph, center hand, with central minutes and seconds. It obviously has the hours, minutes, and small seconds on the dial. It also has the day and the date, and those are located at 9 and 3 o'clock. The reason why I find this watch so incredible is that if you look at the watch, the red seconds hand is your chronograph seconds hand. But instead of there being a minute register like you'd find on any other chronograph that you find, the minute counter is actually in the center of the dial. So you have a minute. You basically have two hands that operate when you run the chronograph. You have a red hand, which is counting the seconds, and then you have this really beautiful white hand with a diamond at the end, which is counting your minutes. This is a really cool interpretation of a 60-minute counter for a chronograph, and I think demonstrates the abilities of A. Lange & Söhne to the highest degree. Just so you know, there'll be links in the show notes if you want to see some pictures of this watch, so be sure to check that out. I also think what is really incredible about this watch, obviously if you flip it over, you've got this incredibly finished movement with a self-winding rotor, but one of the things I really love about this watch is the pushers. The pushers are integrated so well on the side of the case that you hardly even can tell that they are on the watch. It's almost like when you see a hinged case back of a pocket watch. it's almost like that little corner at 2 and 4 o'clock, where you've got the chronograph pushers. So a really well designed watch, and I really, really think this is one of the best watches that was released at Watches and Wonders for sure. I'll move on to one of my favorite brands, Vacheron Constantin. They released the traditional Tourbillon retrograde date open face. A lot of complications, but similar design code to something that they've released, where they have this really nice date complication that runs from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And what you've got here is an open work or an open face dial with a pink gold case. It's 41 millimeters in diameter, slate gray and NAC surface treatment, and hand guilloche on the lower part of the dial. They've got a beautiful tourbillon at 6 o'clock with a really incredible a cage that's very obviously displays the Vacheron Constantin emblem, and just a really beautifully simple dial that is has the Geneva seal to sort of stand by it. Again, I encourage you to take a look at the links in the show notes to see some images of this watch. It really is beautiful. One of the things that's quite interesting about this piece is that it has quite long lugs, so I would imagine this 41 millimeter case actually feels quite large on the wrist. Moving on to Cartier, there was a really cool Cartier Privé Normal that was released this year. This is obviously an inspiration from their previous model that was released during the brand's history. There is a really cool picture. If you follow John Goldberger on Instagram, there's a really cool picture that he's taken where he has his original Privé and this one next to it. It really is amazing to see both so close to one another. I think they've done a really nice job of creating this piece. And you've got this watch comes in gold and on a gold bracelet and on a bracelet, and then you have a platinum version of this watch as well. One of the things that's pretty key about this watch is the design of the bracelet, which is apparently very, very high quality, thick and very well constructed, and really suits the Privé collection down to the originality of the first Privé that actually was released. I think the fact that this is a limited edition piece of 100 each is a good move from them, and I think goes along with a lot of the craze that Cartier has gotten over the last couple of years. I'd say 2 or 3 years. I'm sure there will be people who will buy this and really, really enjoy it. So, again, take a look at some pictures of that watch as well. MB&F released a small release. They obviously have not released a new model, but they took their Legacy Machine Perpetual and gave it what every watch collector loves, and that's a salmon dial. This is obviously something that's super, super sought after by collectors. The LM Perpetual is one of the best constructed and most innovative perpetual calendars that's been released in the last 10 years, in my opinion. And obviously the salmon dial is a nice play on this watch. Another thing that you should also keep in mind is, I believe, and I want to just confirm that before I say this, yes, is that this watch is in steel. Now, MB&F does not release watches in steel. Typically they use precious metals, and so to get a steel MB&F is very, very different. So a pretty good combination for any watch lover that loves steel and salmon dials. I wanted to just briefly talk about the Rolex day dates that were released, specifically the one with the puzzles on the dial. They released this day date with blue dial and stones as hour markers, precious stones as hour markers, but they also have decided to change the way that the day and the date are displayed. So where you would typically get the date, they have replaced that disc to say happy, eternal, gratitude, peace, faith, love, and hope. And then the date wheel at 3 o'clock, which is obviously typical of these watches, has 31 emojis that are used, including a kissy face, 4-leaf clover, an 8-ball, a heart, a peace sign, and the Rolex cornet, which is pretty interesting. I'll admit this is kind of cool to see that Rolex is trying to have some fun with their watches. I'm not really sure who's going to buy these watches, but it will be interesting to see these watches on people's wrists. It is something a little bit different. And if no one ends up buying them, this will probably be a very collectible future Rolex to come. Tag Heuer was celebrating the anniversary of the Carrera, and they have released the 60th anniversary celebration with a steel blue and reverse panda black version of their famous Carrera. This model is being nicknamed the Glass Box because it has this really beautiful domed crystal that kind of pays homage to a lot of the Hesalite crystals that were used on the Carrera back in the day. These watches come in two models. The blue model has a 3-register dial with a date complication at 6 o'clock, and that's sort of integrated into the seconds. Dial is also very, very simple, but a little bit more on the modern side of things. It has this domed, the dial is sort of domed in, has some height to it on the 3 registers that are used. 39 millimeters, which is a very wearable size for collectors. You then can take a look at the Carrera, that's a reverse panda, which is obviously a black dial with white sub-registers. This time the date is actually at 12 o'clock. Not really sure if I like the date at 12 o'clock, just for my aesthetic. I think I prefer it at 6, but I do like, I think, the way that the reverse panda is designed. I'm a little bit more of a vintage enthusiast, so that is probably why. The watch is running on the Heuer 02, or a version of the Heuer 02, which they've called the TH20-00, with a bidirectional winding rotor. 80 hours of power reserve. It's a pretty nice way to celebrate the brand's anniversary. I do find it quite interesting that obviously some of the design aesthetics that they've used in these watches are going to be pivotal to actually celebrating this anniversary. But I also think that the fact that they decided to sort of pay homage to the previous versions of these watches through the crystal is a very interesting move from their perspective. And at $6,500 this is a pretty good price for a pretty amazing watch. Last but not least, I want to discuss the Patek Philippe Calatrava 24-hour travel time 5224R. Now, I'm not going to go too in detail about this watch, but what I'm kind of describing to you is a 42 millimeter rose gold watch with a blue dial, hand applied rose gold Arabic numerals, and a 24-hour time display with a 2 time zone, 2 hours, so you have 2 time zones, sub-seconds at 6 o'clock watch. Now, 24-hour displays is not something that you see very commonly on watches. Even more so, the way that they've laid out the 24 hours actually has the 24-hour at the bottom of at where 6 o'clock typically is on a watch, and 12 o'clock at where 12 o'clock normally is, which is an interesting move. Sometimes you would expect actually for 24 hours to be at the top of the dial, but this actually goes with the idea that you're used to seeing 12 o'clock at the top of the dial instead of at the bottom for a 24-hour display. The dial is actually quite unique. I don't think I've really seen Patek Philippe create something that looks very, very similar to this, especially with the size of the numbers on the dial, the hour indicators on the dial. It definitely is quite an interesting look, and not something that you've kind of seen. It reminds some of sort of oversized aviation watches. It looks really nice. When you flip the watch over, you've got the caliber 31260, which is obviously a dual time zone 24-hour display watch. 48 hours of power reserve automatic movement with a automatic micro rotor, which has kind of become a staple. The micro rotor is actually made out of platinum, beating at 28,800 beats per hour. To me, this movement actually reminds me very, very much of vintage Patek Philippe pocket watches. And so it's quite nice to see the finishing and sort of the design of this movement. It's definitely a winner from Patek Philippe's sort of releases this year. And I'm actually hopeful that maybe people will start using 24-hour displays a little bit more in their watches, because I do think they look very, very nice. As I mentioned, there will be links in the show notes to every single one of the watches that I've discussed on this podcast, so be sure to head over to the show notes if you want to check that out. Let me know what your favorite release for this year was. You can hit us up on Instagram or on our website. Love to chat with you about watches, so let us know. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to follow this podcast. We're growing this community really, really nicely, and it's so much fun talking about watches with you all. If you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind leaving a review on this podcast, it really does help me out. Check out lifeonthewrist.com if you want some more watch content. You can check out our YouTube channel as well. And obviously follow us on all of our social media accounts. We are Life on the Wrist. You'll find the channel on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, we're there. So be sure to head over to the socials if you want daily content from us. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.